How do we begin this?
Well, I just want to say how phenomenal Adam's performance was. It just literally knocked my socks off. I have been doing research for a long time, and I've never seen somebody really capture the torture that OCD is. I found myself about to cry at times, laughing, just very moved. So thank you so much for sharing this story. And I think that if there's anybody who has OCD in the audience or has a loved one with OCD, I think you have done a lot of good tonight, and with all the shows that you've done to really increase awareness about it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Everybody.
We can just applaud all night. I'm fine with that. I've done enough talking. But no, we're going to turn. So I met you at the International OCD conference, OCDF conference in July in San Francisco, and I was unaware of it. It was for me. It was probably the most interesting meeting I had there because I'm pretty aware of the work going on with traditional or classical psychedelics. But I did not, and I knew about ketamine for depression, but I didn't know about ketamine for OCD, and you're really leading the charge with that. So do you want to talk a little bit about? Yeah.
So I feel so fortunate that you came up to our booth and introduced yourself, and
I was just looking for ketamine.
And I'm very fortunate to work with a wonderful team. So our lab, if you guys would stand up just to show all the wonderful work they have. I just want to say that one of the things that really led me to ketamine was as a clinician and seeing that poignant example of, sort of feeling frustrated in that therapy session and not getting what you want. Being on the other side, it is extremely frustrating to have somebody that you know is suffering. And, they've tried the first-line treatments, which you talked about, serotonin reuptake inhibitors, exposure and response prevention, which are very effective in about 50% of individuals, but another 50% aren't helped. And I, as a clinician, just felt extremely frustrated that we couldn't help. And also that these treatments take a long time.
Right.
They take 2 to 3 months. And I really started thinking about what is known out in the field, and as also trained as a neuroscientist and a clinician, what can we know from the basic science to really think about treatments that can help people in our lifetime. And that's really the mission of what our research is about. And at the time, I saw, went to a conference as well, and saw somebody presenting on ketamine and its rapid effects in depression. And at the time, in obsessive compulsive disorder research, they were thinking that OCD and mental disorders increasingly are thought of as brain circuits gone awry. Mm-hmm. And these brain circuits comprise the front part of the brain, the orbitofrontal cortex, which is important for decision making, and then the striatum, which is important for movement, and then the thalamus and looping back. And these circuits in OCD are thought to be hyperactive and hyperstimulated, and that can be because of serotonin, a chemical messenger that is unbalanced, and also glutamate. And I knew that ketamine was a drug that blocks glutamate. And so I thought, is it possible that it could help OCD? Yeah. And at the same time, same thing as you did, I looked up, and there's a research article looking at an animal model in which a protein, the scaffolding protein for glutamate, this neurochemical messenger, when disrupted, causes animal models to have repetitive grooming, so much so that they have patches of skin. And when that protein is added back in the striatum, then that grooming behavior goes away. So I really thought that glutamate may be a new pathway and a new way, where a lot of the medications that are traditionally given are serotonin-based. And it took me about a year and a half of convincing people that this was a good idea. As you depicted, people are like, "What, you want to do what?" And I was like, "No, look, like the science, there's a good theory here, and we have to help people. There's people who are suffering. We have to do this." And eventually it was a kind-hearted anesthesia. I actually went like cold calling anesthesiologists because I had to have an anesthesiologist present.
Because ketamine is an anesthetic, one of the very common anesthetics.
At high doses, it's an anesthetic, and used in adults and children, but we were giving it at very low doses. That's what had been given before. But the Institutional Review Board wanted to make sure that it was observed. We had monitors on, and I did too, but I couldn't convince anybody. And finally, there was this Dr. Pam Flood, wonderful anesthesiologist. She's like, you know, I've been a junior person like you. You know, I'm gonna help you. And we were able to raise some donor funds and just did the first case. And I was, like you, super nervous to give somebody, a very first and brave individual to volunteer for this study, ketamine. And she said she was a teacher, she was needing to organize things, wasn't able to go home to take care of her kids. And when we gave her that infusion, she was she's like, it's like a vacation from my OCD. I can't believe this. I'm trying to have thoughts and I couldn't. And
meaning I'm almost trying to have obsessions, and she couldn't bring it on.
She couldn't, and I almost fainted. I was like, this works, like what? I couldn't believe it, and that moment was one of the greatest moments of my life. Just thinking, like in that moment, like wow, I know something that other people don't, that might be actually helpful. So fast forward, we did a randomized controlled trial of people getting ketamine or placebo. Small study, 15 individuals, and gave them 2 infusions. And what we found is that the 2 groups were significantly different in terms of how they looked like, in terms of having very high intrusive thoughts in both groups. And then when the group that got ketamine, those intrusive thoughts went down, whereas with saline, they stayed up. So that was exciting, not only because it was done quickly and long past ketamine metabolized out of the body, but also because patients were not on any other serotonin medication. So it was the first study ever showing that in OCD, a drug that is thought to act through the glutamate pathway is actually helpful. I'm a skeptic though, and I like to see replication in science. I don't think we have enough of it.
Yep.
So I'm funded by the National Institutes of Health now to do a 5-year study in which we're recruiting 90 individuals to really do this in a very a rigorous, replicated way. We're also looking at neuroimaging, so we're having people look at the thought control circuit in the scanner. We're also looking at, using non-invasive imaging, are there actually changes in glutamate in the brain? So we're really excited, and that's what these guys are working on.
Yeah, that's amazing, and
I'm not funny, so I really appreciate your applause for that.
And just one question. And so how durable are these effects? How long are they lasting after the infusion typically?
So that's the question that we're asking.
Yeah.
So in our first pilot study, we asked 1 week out, are you still having obsessions and compulsions? And half of individuals that got ketamine felt clinically significant changes, so they felt some relief. So that was exciting. But we didn't continue the assessments after. This study is actually looking at 6 months after.
Oh, great.
To see if the effects are durable.
Yeah, and is there is it like sort of the effects are there the most pronounced relief immediately after the infusion and then it tapers off, or does it seem to just kind of, again, I know it's a very small sample size.
Yeah, exactly. Stay
don't know
tuned.
yet.
Stay tuned, all of you. So we'll have some results. But I think one of the difficulties about ketamine and with my clinical is that it can be transient. And so we need better medications, we need faster medications and medications that last. So we've also paired ketamine with exposure and response prevention. And Anthony is doing that great work to see. Ketamine also increases the brain's ability to learn extinction. So that notion that if you have anxiety, you have to do this repetitive behavior. the type of therapy that we do, you basically unlink that, and that's what you were talking about, that you just kind of stay on one side of the street as opposed to moving. And so that is a type of behavior that's learned, and ketamine can boost that learning.
Meaning that you're doing exposure response prevention while people are under the influence of ketamine, or is there like a window after?
Yeah. In animal models, at least, it looks like ketamine increases that learning in 10 days, and so we gave it just in that 10-day window, and we had, instead of half, we had over half. We had over 60% respond.
Wow.
So maybe there could be some synergism.
Yeah, excellent. And it's, I mean, the one thing I'd say though about SSRIs is like you said, about half of people respond, but my understanding was that people who respond typically are seeing less than a 50% reduction in symptoms, which is significant, certainly. But it's still, I think it is important to point out that even most people who are good responders to current medications, still, OCD is still a major part of their lives. It still compromises their functioning. And like you said, it also takes a long time to take effect. So having something that works on an entirely novel pathway is, extremely exciting.
Yes, I have so much hope.
Yeah.
We've done some follow-on studies identifying other drugs. There's one drug that we tried, Repastinel, which seems to act like ketamine but doesn't have the dissociative effects, the blood pressure changes, the side effects. Sometimes people have nausea and vomit. You very nicely described some potential side effects of these medications. And so our research is really aimed at using ketamine as a probe to understand what in the brain needs to change in order to have decreased OCD, and then using that, try other medications that don't have the side effects, that don't have blood pressure, that people feel okay taking.
And actually, that raises a question. So at the doses you're using, so ketamine, everyone in the audience may not be familiar, it's an anesthetic, but at moderate to high doses, it definitely has sort of psychedelic dissociative effects. It sort of exploded on the scene recreationally, I guess, in probably the 90s or so. But prior to that, it was a widely used anesthetic in animals and humans, and still is. So the doses that you're using, are these psychedelic doses? Are these? What sort of effects are people?
Yeah, it's low doses, so people are not anesthetized, they're not asleep, but people feel these kind of unusual experiences, like sometimes report their limbs rotating in space. Sometimes people have an epiphany. And what we've seen, and I'm very interested in, I'm particularly interested in your depiction of this in your comedy, and in the sort of the touching moments of your show as well, which is that what we're noticing is that people have this kind of insight and ability to kind of the dissociation, the separation, where they see themselves without OCD, which can be incredibly motivating. And so we also want to understand the science behind, is that really what the mechanism of action is? Is it just giving people a sense of insight, a sense of hope? You know, and I was very intrigued by wondering about your experience, if that had played a role.
And that's what I wonder with ketamine, where part of is the value, the sort of psychedelic dissociative experience, is that part of the as you said, unusual, I would say awesome effects. The cool part. But no, and to answer your question, with my own experience, I was, you would probably agree with this, I was not a good controlled subject, not a good controlled experiment. So I feel like, I guess the way I look at it is, I've been exposed to these concepts of acceptance and surrender through the 12-step group, through therapy, but acceptance is, understanding doesn't really, you can understand acceptance intellectually, but that's not what gives the relief. It's really that sort of visceral letting go, that leap of faith. And so I had that understanding, but I only actually had the visceral / spiritual, I'd say, experience of surrender while using psychedelics. And once I had that experience, then gradually, with the support of therapy and a 12-step OCD program, I was gradually able to apply that when I wasn't under the influence of psychedelics. But the honest answer is, I have no idea how it worked. You know,
I don't either.
And that's one reason why. And you know, the big challenge with this stuff is, like I said, MAPS is doing amazing work, but it's funding. There's just not, drug companies aren't going to fund this research because they can't patent this stuff. It's also a lot less lucrative to give someone something once or twice over the course of their lives than a daily pill. Governments, there's been reticent funding this, but that's changing a little bit. So yeah, there's a lot of unanswered questions, but also a lot of promise. Yeah. Should we open it up to audience questions? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I was just curious about the changes in the glutamate. So that is a transient effect. You see glutamate, however you measure it or whatever it changes, but not permanently.
Well, actually, that is the question that we have in the study, which is the original study looked at the symptoms that people were reporting, but one thing we want to do is look at the brain itself. And we don't have sufficient data, hasn't been replicated, so that's what we're looking at. We're going to see, does the change in ketamine correlate with the symptom change, and does that symptom change, is that due to the change in glutamate? Maybe, maybe not.
And when you say infusion, it's over a length of time?
Yeah, so it's 40-minute IV infusion.
And what kind of dosage?
0.5 mg per kg, which is the same dosage as the depression studies that were originally done and then replicated several times. Same dose.
And following up on that question, is that window of learning that you mentioned, it might be related to changing the rhythms of the brain? Are you going to look into that?
It's a great question. So we're actually also, in addition to looking at the thought circuit and changes in GABA and glutamate, we're also including EEG. So just like when you sleep, you have natural brain rhythms. One of our hypotheses is that potentially ketamine could increase, there's glutamate and there's also GABA inhibitory compound. Our hypothesis is that it will actually increase, not change glutamate, but really increase GABA, dampen down the circuit, decrease the hyperconnectivity, and then be able to give this nice symphony or synchrony, like a symphony of frequency. So in psychiatry, we don't know how the drugs that we give act on the brain, and so this type of study will help give us a handle into how to better understand how the drugs are working.
Because a little bit on that line in neuroscience, I mean, I'm a complete amateur, like I'm not a connoisseur, but there are studies I've read of people just working on brain rhythms and how they change, that they can change, Alzheimer and Parkinson.
Yes, we actually also have a study looking at brain stimulation, so there's transcranial magnetic stimulation, and that line of research is very appealing to me because of the experiences that we've had with ketamine and serotonin reuptake inhibitors. A lot of people don't like taking serotonin reuptake inhibitors because they have sexual side effects and other, dry mouth and other things. And so being able to, now that we know more about how the thought control circuit is hyperactive, we can use this magnetic system in order to be able to stimulate just that region of the brain. And what's nice about that is it's personalized to each individual person's thought control circuit, and it doesn't have the systemic side effects. So we're just launching that. And again, there is transcranial magnetic stimulation for depression that's already FDA approved. We want to test it for the first time in OCD and see if instead of having treatments which now last months of transcranial magnetic stimulation, we can do it in 1 week. Because it's important for people to find relief now and not be waiting and waiting. You gave a great example of that.
Yeah. And so, are you saying that you'll actually tailor the magnetic stimulation to the specific brain circuits, so there's brain imaging involved?
That's what we're.
So you're looking at people's brains, figuring out what lights up when they're obsessing, and then zeroing in on that.
You got it.
Wow. Yeah. Is that done with depression, that level of sophistication of specific targeting for individuals?
We have a collaborator that works very closely with us at Stanford that showed that worked, that the system works very well for targeting the circuits involved in depression. And that's a nice thing about having these wonderful collaborative partnerships.
Yeah.
I was like, hey, we need this in OCD.
Yeah.
We got to make this happen.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this one's for Adam, and both of you actually. I'm wondering if you have direct experience with using ketamine at any level of
Yes.
Are you willing to report at any level from your own personal issues that we're talking about, the actual experience
Yeah.
of the infusion, or however you
Well,
did it.
so I did not get the infusion in the clinic.
I didn't think so.
Yeah. Well, I did it a couple of times in college, and I don't particularly remember it, and it can be amnesiac. But yeah, at the time of this, the mushroom cure time in my life, which was, several years ago, I did try ketamine, I think 3 times, and once was kind of mild. One time I did enter this sort of dissociative realm it was pleasant, but I don't really remember a lot. And the 3rd time I overshot the mark. This was snorting it, and I wound up throwing up all over my bed. Not a very glamorous drug moment, but yeah, it was intriguing. But I did not, I guess more germane for this discussion, I did not notice any changes in OCD symptoms subsequent to that.
And during the experience?
During the
or
experience,
after?
well, during the experience, you're kind of laid out. You're in this sort of dreamland, lying down in the dark. So I certainly didn't have OCD during it, but I also didn't really have my normal ego identity during it. But yeah, during the experience, I was sort of in this floaty dreamland with images and yeah.
But it's not sustainable, clearly.
Right, but I think the way it's done, right.
Unless you're working in a clinical, I guess.
And it's worth noting that with depression, they've found good results, but it really seems to be this slow infusion that seems to work best. So, like many drugs, the way it's administered and the dose have a huge impact on the effect. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? So my question is about the prospect of helping adolescents, because
With ketamine specifically?
well, with ketamine specifically, but also with psychedelic drugs in general, for 2 reasons. One is that as parents, what we hear when it comes to drug use, the message that we're given to convey further is delay, 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 because of the developing brain. On the other hand, what we're seeing is basically the explosion of all sorts of mental illnesses, depression, and others in adolescent populations. So is there anything to look forward there?
We may have different answers. Do you want to go first?
Sure, yes. So I would say in terms of specifically ketamine in adolescents, it's something that I've been nervous about because we very carefully exclude people that have any history of psychotic disorders, schizophrenia. There's hypotheses out there in which using marijuana or using different kind of drugs can actually unlock a vulnerability within the brain to make people more psychotic. And because early on in OCD and prodromal, which is like the beginning part of schizophrenia, there can be some symptoms that are confusing. You have to be just really dead certain of the diagnoses, and I haven't felt comfortable doing that. At the same time, one of the biggest hurdles that I hear from parents is having their children recognize that they have a problem and that they're not alone, and then they could seek help. And so, one of the things I tell them is, just look at, now in social media, there's a lot of different kind of resources and things that they can do where it's not talking to somebody, the parent directly, which can feel a little bit uncomfortable, but you could say, hey, why don't you check out this app, NOCD? Why don't you check out, and there's conversations, there's threads, different kind of hashtag OCD and different kinds of things that people can start to communicate with a community and see that they're not alone. As well, the National Institutes of Mental Health has great references, ADAA, we mentioned the IOCDF where we met.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of terrific resources. And the difficulty of OCD is that it starts so early, so half of cases start by age 19. If you can catch it and get people to really engage with treatment, exposure, response prevention, other things that don't have side effects, they can just, their trajectory can be really positive and change.
Yeah, in terms of the right age to use psychedelics, it's certainly that there is a view like wait until the brain is fully formed, but there's also the counter view, which is get it early because you can potentially affect more positive changes before these. And we now know that the brain is more plastic throughout life than was previously thought, but it does seem like there's. You probably know a lot more about this than I do. Not probably, you're a doctor. I know a little more. My brief internet research, which I'm sure is more than but it certainly does seem like there's greater plasticity. Am I right about that? When you're younger, so verified. So there is a school of thought. I had Emmanuel Sferios, who's the founder of Dance Safe, which is this organization that promotes drug testing at raves and has saved a lot of lives. And he has teenagers, and he's basically given them the option, and he feels like, if done responsibly in the right context and support, that the benefits outweigh the potential harms of doing it young. The problem is, with prohibition, we don't have these safe contexts. This stuff is generally used underground and, at raves, which is not the optimal. You can have a great experience, but you can also have a terrible experience. So the answer, honestly, like so much of this, is we simply don't know because there hasn't been the research done. But yeah, I think it's reasonable to assume that for better or for worse, there may be a more significant impact if you do this at a young age. The last thing I'd say, though, is this stuff has been used traditionally in societies for probably as long as humans have existed. In fact, some people think this was instrumental in human evolution, psilocybin. It's another discussion. But in all cultures that have used it, to my knowledge, it's generally been used fairly young as an initiation. Maybe it's not all, but certainly most. So there is a precedent for using that way. Whether that's optimal or not, we now want to turn the scientific lens and get more concrete answers, but we don't have those yet. Yeah, I think we have time for maybe one or two more before.
Over here.
Oh, yes.
What are the causes of OCD?
I wish I knew. We don't know. We don't know what causes OCD. We do know there's evidence of this hyperactive thought control circuit, the corticostriatal-thalamocortical loop, but we don't know.
So we don't know what causes that.
We don't know what causes it.
Right.
We know things that are associated with it.
I have a quick question up here.
Yes. Yeah.
Is there any research being done on the possible benefits of ketamine on obsessive compulsive personality disorder? And if not, what do you think there would be?
On obsessive compulsive personality disorder.
So just to define it, so obsessive compulsive disorder is intrusive thoughts that increase anxiety and compulsions that are thought to decrease anxiety. People have this repetitive thoughts for over an hour a day. You're talking about obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which, if I could give you is a personality style, which if I could give you like a mental image, it's individuals who want to have everything perfect. And there's a great picture of like a person crouched down on their front lawn with like little nail clippers trying to clip the grass. And it can also cause impairment in terms of work function. You can imagine things need to be in this very specific way. One of the world's experts is Dr. Anthony Pinto, is a colleague of ours, and he has been doing some research in this area, but there is no study of ketamine for obsessive compulsive personality disorder. He has some really interesting research, so I'll tell you the name again, Anthony Pinto, to look up. Very interesting research about a type of therapy that can be very helpful for this kind of behavior.
Yes.
I guess I'll have a couple questions. One is there any signs of it being addictive of any kind? And then another question is, what I think I understand from what you've been saying is that there's a dose administered, and then there's some training that's happening, and you're finding that that's what you're testing, right? It's like it's in combination of the two, so that someone who's just doing ketamine isn't necessarily going to have the benefits of what your research is, right? Because there's because you don't really know the causes, you're also seeing that there's something that happens in someone's life that they become obsessive compulsive
Some people have early onset. I would say, like in my case, it seemed like it was the end of this relationship with Annie that I talked about briefly, that I didn't actually realize it at the time. Honestly, it wasn't until I started doing this show where I kind of made the connection, but I developed the OCD symptoms very soon after. Prior to that, I certainly had a lot of anxiety and kind of obsessive tendencies, but I didn't develop this sort of ritualistic making, reversing decisions until that trauma, essentially, which seems to be, again, you probably know more than I do, but it seems often that there is, a specific trauma that may set it off, but there are a lot of people who I've met through Obsessive Compulsive Anonymous at our conferences who, their earliest memories are, they feel like they were born that way. So.
I would echo that too, that there doesn't seem to be an association with a specific trauma. For some people it does, something very stressful that happens, but for those stories, I've heard many stories where it just comes out of the blue. You asked like several questions.
Yeah, I'm interested in the training also, like what is...
Yes, so the training that I mentioned, it was a small pilot research study in which we did ketamine, and then it's called cognitive behavioral therapy with exposure and response prevention. That therapy is one of the first-line treatments for OCD. It's highly effective if people can do it. And Adam described some of his attempts to do it. It's actually quite hard to do because, like for example, if you have contamination thoughts, you make a hierarchy of touching a doorknob and not washing your hands, all the way to putting your hand inside of a toilet. That can really be scary for somebody who that's their greatest fear. But when done effectively, it can be very, very helpful. And so our hypothesis was some people may be too scared, but some people may not have the machinery to learn that they don't have to do the compulsions with the anxiety. Maybe it's a learning of that ability of the anxiety to come down. And so that's what we were tapping into with ketamine, because animal models show that it can increase this type of learning. But you don't have to do ketamine with this training. It's available. If you look at IOCDF, you can do that training. We're happy. Our lab is more than willing to speak to anybody after. You can email us at ocdresearch@stanford.edu. We tried purposefully to have a research study for anybody who either is on meds or off meds, who wants medications, who doesn't want medications, who just wants training. We also have ability, if you go into a research study, to have free care with either serotonin reuptake inhibitor or cognitive behavioral therapy. So there's no reason why you couldn't, or any loved one couldn't get access to care. And you don't have to participate in our research studies. We really just want to connect people to care. And thank you for raising attention, raising awareness. We need partners to make the science and work happen. I'm not an expert in having OCD, and so we really rely on people to partner with us who are willing to participate in research studies, because it's scary to participate in a research study. So I would say, find out, see if you're interested in the science, see if it makes sense for you clinically, and see if the team is one you want to work with. It's voluntary, so you can also check them out and say, hey, no, this is not for me.
Yeah, it's wonderful that those resources are available.
The addictive question?
Oh yeah, she asked, sorry, addictive potential of ketamine.
Yes, that's one thing that I'm concerned about. So ketamine is also called Special K, and we're having some new research out showing that one of the reasons why it may work is through the opiate system. And so if that's the case, then there would be this kind of the euphoria piece of it may be understood by that. But my hypothesis is that that ketamine works. First, people feel happy, they have this relief of symptoms, but then it continues to go on. I believe that that's through the glutamate system, but it's a hypothesis, and we need scientific studies to try that.
Right, if it was just a high that was provide the relief, would be presumably wear off when the effects wear off. All right, well, yes, thank you.